All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to bring up our next speaker. And our next speaker is David Knight. David Knight is an author, researcher, videographer, filmmaker, and most importantly, this weekend, he is our AV expert. Without him, we would not be having the depth of the conference that we are having. We definitely wouldn't have Zoom. We wouldn't have the great audio visuals. We wouldn't have the great sound system. We wouldn't have it go as smoothly as it has gone. He's working tirelessly to make it go as smoothly as it can be, and I've been a part of many conferences before, and it just doesn't go this smoothly, and I haven't had to worry about it at all, and I'm so grateful. And our next speaker is going to talk about a topic that we haven't talked about at a conference before, at least not that I've been a part of, and he's going to talk about Hoffa. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome for David Knight.
All right, well, I'm one of the tripods, one of the legs of the tripod of Project JFK CSI Dallas, based out of Kansas with Casey Quillen and Brian Edwards. We've got an incredible website. You can visit us at projectjfk.com. And for those that want to contact us, you can reach us at projectjfk@yahoo.com by email. Or you can call me directly. My number is 913-980-JFK1. 913-980-JFK1, 5351. I paid extra to get that number. All right, well, like Don said, I am an author, researcher, videographer, and filmmaker. I wear several hats. I have a little disclaimer here. With the topic that's being presented here today, there's no way to explain everything in a one-hour presentation. There is going to be more parts to be presented at future dates and will appear on our website at projectjfk.com. A few years ago, I gave a teaser. I've been working on this presentation for about 9.5, almost 10 years. Now, things change. It's a lot of research, and it's definitely close to my heart. I will try to keep my language in check because it deals with Jimmy Hoffa. It deals with the Teamsters. I was a truck driver for many years. I was never part of the union, but, you know, I'll explain more as we get through the presentation. The topic today is called the JFK Assassination, the Hoffa Connection, Connecting the Dots. It is the crime of the century. Two brothers by blood and by birth. Two brothers by the bond of the Union. Two presidents. President of the United States and President of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. Introducing our key players. President John F. Kennedy. Let me get my notes here in check. And looky there. See, even I have technical difficulties, and I'm the guy running this shit, so.
It doesn't look good.
Well, oh yeah, and if you hear that voice pop up, that's my smart-ass son. But I'm really glad he's here, and the reason why is because this is all about getting the younger generation involved. He's 13. I can tell you, as a quick little side note, 3 kids, 20, 13, and 12. I have been to their schools several times because I seem to know more than their history teachers do. Why? I think it's because the teachers of today, at least in the public schools, not so much on the college level, but they seem to be getting dumbed down. They're more concerned about other things than especially history. Because, hey, that's in our past. All right. Quiet. No arguments from the peanut gallery out there. Okay, our 35th president, John F. Kennedy, a president by the people and for the people. A new vision into the new frontier. U.S. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy. Robert F. Kennedy, United States Attorney General, the most powerful attorney of the land and a crusader of justice. Well, this sounds a lot like the start of a superhero movie, doesn't it? Well, this was real life, ladies and gentlemen. The Kennedy family patriarch, Joseph P. Kennedy. The Kennedy family patriarch, Joe Kennedy, and his actions to get his son in the Oval Office of the White House and make him president have been scrutinized because when John F. Kennedy was running for office, the elder Kennedy turned to members of the mob in the Union to secure votes to push JFK past Nixon in the presidential election. It has been said Joseph P. Kennedy early on made part of his fortune in illegal activities as a bootlegger during Prohibition. Some believe this did happen and some do not. He made money with importing alcohol after Prohibition ended, but he made money other ways in the movie business and in the stock market by shorting stocks. So when others would lose their fortunes, he was making his by betting the value of certain stocks would go down instead of up. As far as most of his stocks that he owned, he sold off before the 1929 crash. Now, does this mean that he didn't have shady dealings with unsavory individuals? Not at all. There were rumors that he worked with former gangsters that had gone legit. How legit is to be questioned. And to do collections while chasing down contracts with restaurants and liquor stores. There was a connection between Frank Sinatra and Joe Kennedy, and Sinatra had ties to the mafia, and he loved to flaunt that. Frank Sinatra was around JFK as well. It is said that when Attorney General Bobby Kennedy was going after organized crime, Frank Sinatra went to Joseph Kennedy and asked for him to talk to his sons and to lay off because they had helped to get JFK into office. He was getting pressure put down on him by the mafia. From an interview with Frank Sinatra's daughter to 60 Minutes, here is what she said about her father and his connections. Tina Sinatra says that her father was one of the most reliable targets each time the world goes looking for a tarnished hero. Acted as a facilitator when John F. Kennedy's election machine realized it could use a little help from the mafia 40 years ago. The singer, whose job as a go-between was set up by the Kennedy family patriarch Joseph, asked the Chicago crime overlord Sam Giancana to use the mob's muscle to deliver Union votes. It was thought to be in Jack Kennedy's best interest if his father did not make the contact directly. Ms. Sinatra, 52 at the time, told the CBS current affairs program 60 Minutes Dad was on an errand. Sinatra received the call when JFK, then a member of the Senate, was fighting Hubert Humphrey for the Democratic nomination to run as president in 1960. His father believed that Giancana's influence could make the difference in the West Virginia primary. Sinatra was chosen for the task because Kennedy knew Dad had access to Sam Giancana, his daughter said. The mafia boss agreed to help, indicating that it was all in a day's work for him. It's a couple of calls, he said. But Giancana felt betrayed after Kennedy won the primary and then the White House, and his brother Robert, the Attorney General, turned against organized crime. Ms. Sinatra said Sam was saying, "That's not right. You know he owes me." He, meaning Joe Kennedy, and Dad, I think, said, "No, I owe you. I asked for the favor." Her father repaid his debt to Giancana by agreeing to play the mobster's Chicago club, the Villa Viennas, and made the apology more fulsome by bringing along Sammy Davis Jr. and Dean Martin for an 8-night engagement. Subsequently, the president, the performer, and persistent criminal were linked through the late Judith Exner, who had affairs with all three. Sinatra said that contact with the underworld elements was all part of the entertainment industry. In theatrical work, in nightclub work, in concerts, he told an interviewer. In restaurants, you meet all kinds of people, so there's really not much to be said about that, and I think the less the better. Ms. Sinatra said her father talked also of acting as a courier for the CIA. Because he controlled his own air travel, the CIA would ask him and many others with their capacity to that courier a body, a living person, not a corpse, but a diplomat on papers. But he never divulged any names. Pictured here is JFK, Judith Exner, and Sam Giancana. JFK had a 2.5-year affair with Judith Exner, and Exner had ties to mobster or Chicago godfather Sam Giancana. The connection with Giancana was used to send envelopes and packages to John Kennedy, with Exner acting as the courier. Sam got Kennedy the votes in Illinois, that he needed to help him become president. She also had ties to Frank Sinatra. Sinatra had ties to Giancana. The web grows. She also had ties to Sinatra and Exner were having an affair before hers started with Kennedy. Talk about a connection and connecting those dots. Giancana was shot and killed with 7 shots to the head, even while under federal surveillance, so they can get to anybody. 2 brothers, Jack and Bobby, were on a collision course with enemies that are being targeted. I'm speaking of organized crime, also known as the mob or the mafia. RFK's pursuit of justice and bringing down organized crime was popular by some, but it sure as hell wasn't favored by the mafia. They thought they had a deal with Joseph P. Kennedy. The brothers were going to look the other way, but Bobby Kennedy had other plans. The mafia and others involved in organized crime, pictured here as a cabal of individuals involved with some of the shadiest of shit that the mob had to offer, from illegal activities such as racketeering, smuggling, fraud, counterfeiting, robbery, bribery, assault, money laundering, illegal gambling, loan sharking, weapon trafficking, drug trafficking, extortion, financing, murder, prostitution, pornography, theft, just to name a few. Enemies are targeted like Johnny Rosselli, Sam Giancana, Santos Trafficante, Carlos Marcello. David Ferry, Jerry Patrick Hemming, Guy Bannister, and E. Howard Hunt, just to name a few. We see pictured here Mr. and Mrs. Kennedy in a parade with smiles on their faces and their future bright and full of promise. That will come to an end on November the 22nd, 1963. On a day like any other, for most in this world, it started like any other. But for a group of individuals, it was a day of death. For the conspirators and for the man himself, President John F. Kennedy, their lives will be changed forever. For the rest of us, our view would be changed forever as well. But our innocence would be shattered on that fateful day in November 63. JFK and Jimmy Hoffa, two men walking different paths straight into the history books. A popular president murdered by assassin's bullets, cut down in his prime. The other, the president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, who worked his way up through the ranks and in his eyes more powerful than the president of the United States. Brothers till the end, doing it their way. Jack and Bobby are taking names and, oh, never mind. How about just pissing off the wrong people and making enemies with the wrong people? JFK alienating those who helped him get votes, and RFK going after these kinds of individuals using legal means. The Kennedys were powerful, but eventually they had to answer for what they did and who they did it to. There we go, Jimmy Hoffa. James Riddle Hoffa, born February 14, 1913, disappeared July 30th, 1975. He was declared dead July 30th, 1982. He was an American labor leader who served as the president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, the IBT, from 1957 until 1971. From an early age, Hoffa was a union activist, and he became an important regional figure with the IBT by his mid-20s. By 1952, he was the national vice president of the IBT and was in general presidency between 1957 and 71. He secured the first national agreement for Teamsters rates in 1964 with the National Master Freight Agreement. He played a major role in the growth and development of the union, which eventually became the largest by membership in the United States with over 2.3 million members at its peak. During his terms as its leader, Hoffa became involved with organized crime from the early years of his Teamsters work, a connection that continued until his disappearance in 1975. He was convicted of jury tampering, attempted bribery, conspiracy, mail-in wire fraud. In 1964, in two separate trials, he was imprisoned in 1967 and sentenced to 13 years. In mid-1971, he resigned as president of the union as part of a commutation agreement with then U.S. President Richard Nixon and was released later that year. But Hoffa was barred from union activities until 1980. Hoping to regain support and return to IBT leadership, he's unsuccessfully tried to overturn that order. Hoffa's legacy continues to stir debate. The Get Hoffa Squad. Bobby Kennedy and his pursuit of James Riddle Hoffa and his Get Hoffa Squad. 1964, that was assembled. Robert Kennedy was appointed U.S. Attorney General in 1960 by the newly elected president, his brother JFK. Indicting Jimmy Hoffa was a high priority with the new Attorney General, who claimed that Hoffa used extortion, bribery, and physical violence to rule the Teamsters. Robert Kennedy was equally sure that Hoffa used the threat of labor trouble to bully employers for personal profit, a small Justice Department unit of lawyers and investigators informally known as the Get Hoffa Squad. It was assembled to uncover and prosecute any unlawful activity within organized labor. By the time they disbanded, their conviction rate was impressive. Yet Robert Kennedy's campaign against union corruption, and Hoffa in particular, raised questions about the role of an attorney general in prosecuting crimes. The constant investigations resembled a vendetta to those who suspected Kennedy's motives. Some thought the attorney general was dogging on Hoffa out of a personal spite. Others questioned the ethics of the national chief's law enforcement officer aggressively investigating an individual before evidence of wrongdoing presented itself. Civil libertarians were concerned by Hoffa's never proven but steady protest that he was a victim of illegal surveillance and paid government perjurers. The debate also included his union cronies, politicians under his control, and enemies of the Kennedys, all of whom were exploited the situation. One of the first major indictments against Hoffa focused on a Florida real estate development called Sun Valley. Federal prosecutors knew that Hoffa and others had secretly loaned union money to finance the project and secured further loans from local banks by promising them large union accounts. This was a big no-no. Sun Valley was promoted as a sunny retirement community for union members. In fact, Hoffa and his associate Owen Brennan held an option to buy 45% of the development. By risking union funds, Hoffa and Brennan stood to make personal fortunes, and the development proved unsuccessful. Instead, Sun Valley remained an undeveloped disaster area. Hoffa was indicted for mail fraud and conspiracy. but the indictments were dismissed in '61 when a Florida judge ruled that the grand jury issuing them had been improperly impaneled. A second set of indictments was approved, but dropped as investigators incorporated their evidence into Hoffa's '64 Chicago fraud trial. Hoffa was next indicted for violating the Taft-Hartley Act, which prohibits employee representatives from accepting illegal payoffs from employers. The government charged that a Michigan trucking firm, Commercial Carriers, had organized a Nashville, Tennessee business called Test Fleet for the sole purpose of avoiding labor trouble with Hoffa's union. As soon as the new business was incorporated, in the maiden name of Hoffa's and Brennan's wives, Commercial Carriers released all of Test Fleet's trucks and assumed all their operating expenses, making the venture income a pure profit for its owners. Hoffa claimed that putting the business in his wife's name was a legal tax move. The 1962 case ended with a mistrial when jurors could not agree on a verdict. Yet Hoffa and 5 others were immediately indicted for tampering with the jury. The new case was moved to Chattanooga, Tennessee. In 1964, when Hoffa's attorney was arrested and ultimately convicted for trying to bribe a police officer into offering a prospective juror $10,000 to ensure another hung jury. So they just kept on and kept on and kept on. Although he never actually worked as a truck driver, he became president of Local 299 in December 1946. Hoffa took over presidency of the Teamsters in '57 at the convention in Miami Beach, Florida. His predecessor, Beck, had appeared before the John L. McClellan-led U.S. Senate Select Committee on Improper Activities in Labor or Management Field in March 1957 and took the Fifth Amendment 140 times in response to questions. Beck was under indictment when the IBT convention took place and was convicted and imprisoned in a trial for fraud held in Seattle. Frank Fitzsimmons took over as president of the Teamsters when Hoffa went up the river to prison. Hoffa took Fitz off the loading docks and he picked him to run things until he got back, and then he would resume the role of president. Hoffa thought he could trust him to do the things his way, but Frank Fitzsimmons enjoyed the benefits of being in charge, and the mafia took advantage of dealing with someone they could control and get access to what the unions had to offer, which Hoffa wasn't playing ball. Picture here is Hoffa going to prison, but it was affectionately known as going to college by mob terms. Hoffa was away and Fitz got to play. While in prison, Hoffa couldn't wait to get out and get his union back. He didn't like the way things were being handled or how the Teamsters were being ran. Of course, part of his pardon from President Nixon was that he would not be able to be part of the union, let alone be the president of the National Brotherhood of Teamsters, at least until 1980. Well, this enraged Hoffa because if he knew that was going to be part of the deal, he would have waited until his next parole date and take his chances. It was less than a year. When he got out of prison, he needed to do what he needed to do to earn and make money, plus he was going to try and do what he could to get his union back. Hoffa stayed quiet about his past union activities and didn't rat. But his associates before going to prison were now just ignoring him and figured since he didn't wield as much power, what the hell was he able to do about it? Well, he threatened to start telling tales and naming names. The mob wasn't going to have this continue. A plan was starting to happen. It was time to get rid of Hoffa. Now we're going to talk about Frank the Irishman Sheeran. He's going to be a big portion of this presentation. He was also a Teamster president. He was brought in, and Hoffa basically took him under his wing and taught him everything he knew. He was also known as the Irishman. He was an American labor union official who was accused of having links to the Buffalino crime family in his capacity as a high-ranking official in the IBT. The president of Local 326, Sheeran, was a leading figure in the corruption of unions by organized crime. In 1980, he was convicted of labor racketeering and sentenced to 32 years in prison, of which he served 13 years. Shortly before his death, he claimed to have killed Teamster leader Jimmy Hoffa in 1975. Author Charles Brandt detailed what Sheeran told him about Hoffa in the narrative nonfiction work, I Heard You Paint Houses. This is the book, if you have not read it. It's a very good, informative read. The new editions, it has a new cover now. It's just called The Irishman because since they made this into a movie on Netflix, which you can watch it, it's a 3.5 hour Martin Scorsese film. But if you liked Goodfellas and Casino, this will rank right up there with it. The truthfulness of the book has been disputed by some, including Sheeran's confessions to killing Hoffa and Crazy Joe Gallo. The book is a basis. I just said that. Okay. Robert De Niro plays Frank Sheeran, Al Pacino as Hoffa. So you know it's got to be good, right? Okay, I don't have any cutesy pictures of Mr. Sheeran to show you, but I do have this pic. This is where I want to start. Let me talk about his military service and what I feel made him the man he would become. World War II. Sheeran enlisted in the United States Army in August 1941, completed basic training near Biloxi, Mississippi, and was assigned to the military police. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor, he volunteered for training in the airborne at Fort Benning, Georgia. But he dislocated his shoulder and was transferred to the 45th Infantry Division, known as the Thunderbirds and the Killer Division. On July 14th of 1943, he set sail for North Africa. Sheeran served 411 days of combat duty. That's not normal. Combat duty is less than 100 days. He served 411 days. His first experience of combat was during the Italian campaign, including the invasion of Sicily, the Salerno landings, and the Anzino campaign. He then served in the landings in southern France and the invasion of Germany. Sheeran said, all in all, I had 50 days lost under AWOL, absent without leave, mostly spent drinking red wine and chasing Italian, French, and German women. Hey, he was a ladies' man. However, I was never AWOL when my outfit was going back to the front lines. If you were AWOL when your unit was going back into combat, you might as well keep going because one of your own officers would blow you away and they didn't even have to say it was the Germans. That's desertion in the face of the enemy. Well, how about war crimes? Sheeran recalled his war service at the time when he developed a callousness for taking human life. He claimed to have participated in numerous massacres and summary executions of German POWs, acts which violated the Hague Convention in 1899 and 1907, and the 1929 Geneva Convention on POWs. In interviews with Charles Brandt, he divided such massacres into 4 categories. Number 1, revenge killings in the heat of battle. Number 2, orders from unit commanders during a mission. Number 3, the Dachau reprisals and other reprisal killings of Nazi concentration camp guards and trustee inmates. Number 4, calculated attempts to dehumanize and degrade German POWs. No hesitation in doing what he had to do. Well, there were going to be a lot of things he had to do over the years. The government made this man into a tough, hard-trained killer. Those skills he learned would be going to be useful to him one day. He looks like a nice guy to me, right? Frank was a trucker first and then joined the Teamsters and one day became president himself of one of the locals. Hoffa and Sheeran understood each other, and when Hoffa traveled somewhere, he wanted Frank by his side. He trusted him and he knew Frank would protect him. There have been 2 films about Jimmy Hoffa. Actually, there's been several films, but I'm going to talk about 2 in particular. Number 1, Hoffa, made in 1992, and obviously we're talking about The Irishman, made in 2019. Now, this is kind of a personal note, and this is kind of why I got into this. I'm not just a one-trick pony with JFK. I have a memory as a teenager going to see this movie with my parents, and I don't remember seeing my dad cry that often growing up. I remember stories that my dad had told me about Jimmy Hoffa. He knew him, but I couldn't understand why he was so upset. The film affected him at the end when Hoffa was murdered while sitting in the back of his car. The ride home was silent, so the next day I asked what the hell was going on. Hearing how JFK and RFK's assassinations affected not just my parents, but everyone at the time, I understood what Hoffa's disappearance and murder, or the assassination, if you will, also affected him. The film took creative licensing and the film changed names, but it gave me the first look at James R. Hoffa as a person, not just stories being relayed to me by my father. Jack Nicholson played Hoffa and played it very well. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. The other movie we're talking about, The Irishman, based on the book I Heard You Paint Houses. It's kind of cool. They took like Bobby De Niro and Al Pacino, Joe Pesci. Now, if you saw the movie Goodfellas, they were in their younger prime back then. But now, because of their age, they actually did a process, and doing film, it interests me. They actually did a de-aging process that had never been done in the history of film. So when you watch it, you're actually looking at the actors, but they look about 30 or 40 years younger. So it's pretty neat. And of course, you got Pacino playing Hoffa, and you got De Niro playing Sheeran, and actually De Niro is not that tall. He's actually wearing lifts in his shoes. Okay. I Heard You Paint Houses are the first words, where the hell did my mouse go? Are the first words that Jimmy Hoffa ever spoke to Frank the Irishman Sheeran. To paint a house is to kill a man. The paint is the blood that spatters on the walls and floors. In the course of nearly 5 years of recorded interviews, Frank Sheeran confessed to Charles Brandt that he handled more than 25 hits for the mob and for his friend Jimmy Hoffa. He also provided intriguing information about the mafia's role in the murder of JFK. And in the new edition of I Heard You Paint Houses, because the book first came out in the 70s, well, the new edition, there's several sections that could not be talked about before. Dallas is being one of those, and we're going to talk about that at the end. So after returning home, he became a hustler and a hitman, working for legendary crime boss Russell Buffalino. Eventually, Sheeran would rise to a position of such prominence that in a RICO suit, the U.S. government would name him as one of the only two non-Italians in conspiracy with the commission of the La Cosa Nostra, alongside the likes of Anthony Tony Provenzano and Anthony Fat Tony Salerno. When Buffalino ordered Sheeran to kill Hoffa, the Irishman did the deed, knowing that if he had refused, he would have been killed himself. Charles Brandt's Page Turner has become a true crime classic. So I just gave you the whole thing in my presentation. Frank Sheeran's the one that actually killed Jimmy Hoffa. Here's a couple pictures of Mr. Sheeran close to the end of his life and his golden years, surviving his friends and becoming the keeper of many secrets. Here's an eerie picture, Hoffa holding a bullet, especially since he was most likely shot and killed before he was disappeared. See, there was no autopsy because there was no body found of Hoffa. We wouldn't be going through like we do with JFK going, hey, let's look at ballistics, let's look at the body, how many holes. No, we don't have that with Hoffa. Lucky for us, Walter White is a fictional character, or otherwise he may have wound up in a barrel of acid. That is one of the theories of how he was disposed of, murdered and stuffed in a barrel. I wonder if that's how, Breaking Bad got that. Put everybody in a barrel. These next few slides are the top people in the Irishman movie. The actor is on the left, the real-life counterpart is on the right. Al Pacino, Jimmy Hoffa. Harvey Keitel, Angel Bruno. Angel Bruno was the boss of the Philadelphia crime family for two decades. He died by a shotgun blast while sitting in a car on March 21st, 1980. Russell Buffalino was the head of the Buffalino crime family. Russell is the one who introduced Sheeran to Hoffa. The order to have Hoffa killed came from Russell Buffalino. Russell died in prison on February 25th, 1994. If somebody needed to get whacked, if it was something to do with the mob carrying out something, Russell Buffalino, it had to go through him. He was basically like we would think of the Godfather, or maybe Tony Montana. How about Stephen Graham, Anthony Tony Provenzano? Well, Tony Pro was a capo in the Genovese crime family. He was also a president of the Teamsters in Local 560 in Union City, New Jersey. It's funny how all these guys seem to be tied to the mafia, and plus they're also presidents of the Teamsters. So there's definitely that connection. Hoffa wanted his help to become leader back in the Union, but Pro wouldn't help him when they got out of prison. He threatened Hoffa by ripping out his guts and kidnapping his grandchildren. To say there was animosity between Pro and Hoffa is an understatement. Tony Pro wanted Hoffa killed. Jesse Plemons. Oh yeah, Breaking Bad. Okay. Few connections there. Chucky O'Brien is who he played. Chucky O'Brien, referred to as Hoffa's son, actually drove Hoffa in the car that led Hoffa to the house where he was killed. Now, he said that he didn't know that was the plan and knew nothing about the plan to kill Hoffa. Matter of fact, they went through the police to look at his car, see if they could find any evidence, any DNA. Actually, not DNA. They didn't have DNA back then. But they went in looking for evidence. They looked for blood, hairs. They found hairs and stuff. Well, of course, he was in Chucky O'Brien's car all the time, so it was not something out of the unusual. How about this crazy bastard? Sebastian Maniscalco, Crazy Joe Gallo. He was crazy, all right. Crazy Joe Gallo was murdered on April 7, 1972 in New York. Frank Sheeran admits in Brandt's book as the gunman. And we got Bobby D. and Frank Sheeran. Robert De Niro's portrayal of Frank Sheeran is one of his greatest works. All right, we're going to talk about this house. Now, this isn't the Amityville Horror House, but a horror did happen there. Hoffa was last seen on July 30th, 1975 at the Damascus Red Fox, and it was the site of his planned meeting that day with Anthony Provenzano and Anthony Ciccolone. Hoffa called his wife from a payphone, upset that he had been stood up for the 2 p.m. meeting. Now, Hoffa didn't like being late. You need to be early. If you were on time, you were late. Man, my dad used to say that to me. He was stood up for the 2 p.m. meeting, but it was never heard from again. His car remained unlocked at the Red Fox, yet no trace of him was found. Frank Sheeran claimed that he was in a vehicle with Chuck O'Brien and Sal His name is hard as, well, it's Italian. Briguglioa? Yeah, there we go. They picked Hoffa up at the Damascus Red Fox at some point around 2:40. They then drove just over 9 miles to a home located at 17841 Beaverland Street in Detroit, where Hoffa's life allegedly ended. According to Sheeran's telling of the events, he and Hoffa entered the home alone. When Hoffa saw no one was there and he thought it was a setup and he was going to get whacked, he allegedly tried to leave, and that's when Sheeran shot Hoffa twice behind the right ear. Sheeran left the gun atop Hoffa's body and exited the home, leaving Hoffa dead in the foyer. I mean, that's some cold shit. That's one of your best friends. That's one of the guys that, took you in, and either you took him out or they were going to take you out. And they were still going to take out Hoffa. So I guess it's the CYOA, cover your own ass. Here's a picture of the Damascus Red Fox. It'd be back in the 70s, and then what it kind of looks like today. The meeting place where the meeting never happened. And there's our buddy Joe Pesci. That scene might look familiar. It's actually from JFK, where he played David Ferry. He plays Russell Buffalino in this one. So what really happened to James Riddle Hoffa? Well, his name says it all. It's a riddle. The riddle wrapped in an enigma. Several theories on Hoffa's disappearance, and let's call it what it was. It was an assassination. An assassination of a different kind of president than JFK. So several theories: Florida Swamp, Giant Stadium, Great Lakes, New Jersey Junkyard, Bay County Swimming Pool, Renaissance Center, Oakland Turnpike Barn, Jersey City Landfill. Hell, maybe he's underneath the floor right here. We'll just add that to the list. The most likely scenario is the Irishman plot, and Frank Sheeran as the man who assassinated Jimmy Hoffa. Frank was on a mission from his mob friends to carry out their order of killing a problem to them and to kill his friend, Jimmy. After he did his job, he left the murder weapon. Didn't take it with him. He walked out that door and he never looked back. The theory that Jimmy Hoffa was cremated at the Detroit mob-controlled Central Sanitation was made popular by Frank the Irishman Sheeran. Sheeran was a union official with links to the Buffalino crime family. Sheeran described Hoffa's body being dragged down the hall by 2 accomplices, and after he was told that Hoffa had been cremated at Central Sanitation, by the way, was owned by Detroit Mafia lieutenants Peter Bazzi Vital and Raphael Jimmy Cusano. I can't say his name. Anyway, we're just going to call him Raphael Q. According to Detroit mob insiders, this was a very common way for the mafia to get rid of bodies. Well, guess what? I worked in landfills. I worked in trucking, driving trash. Yeah, I heard stories about mobs dumping bodies in pits and lighting them on fire and burying them. Who the hell's going to look in a landfill? It happens. Another place the cremation of Hoffa's body could have been done was at Evergreen Cemetery in Detroit. It wasn't that far away. It was carried out by a couple of Tony Pro's guys, brothers Steve and Tom Andretta. You can read about these guys. You can find them online. These 2 brothers were said to be at the house, as told by Frank Sheeran. They were waiting in the kitchen. Well, they weren't going to take his ass out by daylight, so they waited. They put him in a body bag, put him in the back of a car, took him down and cremated him. Now, that makes the most sense. You're going to put a guy in a barrel and hope that it doesn't, float up to the top of the water? No. Burn him. Scatter the ashes. That gets rid of him. So Frank was questioned on multiple occasions by the feds just to give up the details and admit to what he knew. He finally told his story and admitted to killing Hoffa, but not to the authorities. He told his story to Charles Brandt. Now, I'm going to read you the excerpts. I told you that this has the, go here. It says it's the, it's kind of catchy how they did the title of the chapter. But it's stories that could not be told before. So let's just think about this for a minute. You'll find these on page 353 to 361. Angela Bruno was heard on a wiretap saying that we ought to kill the big one, meaning JFK, and said we ought to kill the little one, meaning RFK. Russell Buffalino was talking to Frank Sheeran and said, "You're dreaming, my friend. If you think they can't take out the president, let me restart that. You're dreaming, my friend. If they could take out the president, they could take out the president of the Teamsters." Frank spoke about picking up a bag of rifles for Dallas from Tony Provenzano at the Genovese Hangout, Monty's restaurant in Brooklyn. You know who he said he gave the bag of rifles to? David Ferry. Thanks to Robert Kennedy, Tony Pro was sent to prison and he lost his pension. That gave him reason to want to have RFK killed. I got to make sure I watch my mouth here. Carlos Marcello remarked on 3 different occasions, not once, not twice, 3 different occasions, that Kennedy, that smiling MFer, we'll fix him in Dallas. We're going to get Kennedy in Dallas. Marcello was talking to Tony Pro in New York at a celebration, and Russell Buffalino was also there. What backs up this claim are from released FBI reports. The commission, the mafia as a whole, participated in Dallas, but the question is, at what level? I know a lot of people, maybe some in this room, say, oh, the mafia had nothing to do with it, it was CIA. Yeah, it was CIA. But you want to tell me that the mafia didn't have a connection to it? Hell yeah, they had a connection to it. You can't dismiss it. You have to go into this case and you have to look at every faucet. Turn on that tap and see what pours out. In closing, yeah, I got this one done pretty good. In closing for now, why am I talking about this? There are dots that are connected between JFK, RFK, and Hoffa. All 3 were assassinated, and the reason these men were killed, they pissed off the wrong people for different reasons. The disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa is one of the longest unsolved crimes in history. Hoffa was conspired against, and he died of a conspiracy. Thank you.
We have time for questions. We have time for questions. If anybody has a question for David?
I will do my best to...
Make your way to the
Oh,
microphone.
matter of fact, yes. Ed brought something up to me a while ago, and I want Ed to read this. Now, I love Ed, and I love his accent. So, Ed, give it to us. Yeah, it's a little different when the other David's on the table back there, isn't it? Hey, I get to. I'm your dad.
He said there were 2 things. Oh, that's he's connected that.
There you go.
Okay. David and I are conspiring together here
All the great
improvisationally.
conspirators, yes.
And this is good because I would have to talk about this tonight, and since my time is so limited, this is good. This is one less slice I won't have to deal with tonight. As David has pointed out, pretty much all the Hoffa researchers and all the feds who have pursued the murder of Jimmy Hoffa believe that Tony Provenzano of New York and Russell Buffalino of Pennsylvania are the guys that ordered the hit. And the speculation is that a Detroit mobster named Anthony, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, Giacalone is the man who lured Hoffa into the car from which he never returned. Now, the reason why this is important is because those who are in the know believe that probably the most dastardly lawyer in American history would be Roy Cohn. But there was one guy more powerful than even Cohn. His name was Sidney Korshak. And Sidney Korshak, he's involved with everything. And his main client was General Dynamics, which is where I'm going tonight. But Korshak was the mob lawyer. And a couple of weeks before the press and the authorities started to realize, where the hell is Jimmy Hoffa? And they figured, Jesus, maybe he's been knocked off, that Sidney Korshak already knew. And one of his business partners, mafia guy, said, what happened to Jimmy? And Korshak said, he's dead, and don't ever bring up that name again. Now, there are documents that have been released, and it shows that Korshak was close friends with Giacalone. So maybe Sidney's got something to do with it. I had one other thing that I found afterwards, David, that I thought I should just kind of read it, 2 little paragraphs here. Joe Kraus, the head of the Jewish Historical Society, told Vanity Fair about Korshak. All his life, all around him, they went down in their own blood. Charles Geo was murdered by his own in 54. Willie Bioff was blown up in 55. Alex Greenberg was hit in 56. Gus Greenbaum, the manager of the Riviera, was murdered in his bed, his throat cut from ear to ear in 58. Giancana in June of 75. Hoffa, July. Johnny Roselli, what was left of him, his legs and torso sawed apart, found in an oil drum floating in Dumfoundling Bay in the summer of 76. Ray Ryan, blown to hell in 77. Alan Dorfman, slain in 83. And John Russell Hughes, a mafia guy, expert, said, Sidney Korshak mastered the art of walking through the business life with one foot in the boardroom and one foot in the gutter. Because he ran, his associate out in California was the MCA leader, Lou Wasserman. He was close to Johnson. He was everywhere, Korshak. And the Vanity Fair writer wrote, Sidney Korshak, who moved among these men, who knew the secrets that they knew, not only the secrets of the forbidden anatomies of Vegas and Hollywood, of politics and the mob, but also the vaster secrets of the fates of the Kennedys as such, that Giancana knew, and Hoffa knew, and Roselli knew, and more, the secrets of the fates of those men themselves. Sidney Korshak, who lived unseen in the unseen heart of the beast, and who at the same time entertained beautifully in Bel Air. Sidney Korshak escaped, no, prevailed, prospered in blessed fortune without so much as a scratch. He lived to be 88. He was banging Rhonda Fleming, Jill St. John, and Stella Stevens, and the last two, he was doing it simultaneously. Crime does pay.
Thank you, Ed. I appreciate that. Great addition to the presentation.
What do I do? Paul, Consular from Washington, D.C. My question, the night before Jack Ruby received so much cash from an associate of Jimmy Hoffa, how much money did he receive?
$10,000.
Okay, that's one.
I know exactly what you're talking about. It was $10,000.
Slightly different.
I'm going to do a little quick add-on, and then we'll take a little quick break, and then we'll go right into RFK.
Slightly different mafia question. To what extent was Meyer Lansky and his mafia branch involved in the assassination of JFK?
Well, Meyer Lansky, do I think he was involved in it? He was, well, here's the thing. When I said the commission, well, guess who started the commission? The commission, back in the day when they had all different families that were basically going to war with one another, blowing the hell out of one another, killing them, they eventually got together and said, you know what, we can't do this no more. So they decided that everybody was going to be involved in the commission at the table. Everybody got a vote. Now, Meyer Lansky, along with, oh God, I can't think of the name at the moment. Luciano. Yeah, Lucky Luciano. And he was lucky because he was kind of the original Scarface. But they brought everybody to the table and decided the commission was going to, they were going to take a vote on everything. Well, like I said a while ago, the commission is the one that voted on it. Russell Buffalino in there with the Buffalino crime family, everything ran through him at that time. So do I think that, Meyer Lansky was part of that? He was part of the commission. So again, at that point, guilty by association of La Cosa Nostra, he was guilty of it as well. So if you join a gang, and this is kind of a movie, have anybody seen 3 Billboards Outside of Missouri? It's a good movie. I won't repeat it word for word what Francis McDormand said, but you can be guilty by association by just being part of that group. So when you look at the commission, the mafia, organized crime, they're guilty by association. So I hope that answers your question on Meyer Lansky.
Not so much a question, but a comment.
Go ahead, Rick.
I was born in Philadelphia. My name is Bucciarelli, and I'm hearing all these Italian names being mentioned up here.
I should have had you give me a crash course.
That's probably true, but a special interest story. Angelo Bruno lived in my grandmother's neighborhood.
Hold your mic a little closer to your mouth.
Angelo Bruno lived in my grandmother's neighborhood.
I'll be
And he
damned.
was known as the Gentle Don because while he allowed prostitution and gambling to take place, he wouldn't allow drugs in. And he himself was shot and killed in front of a restaurant in a car. But when my grandfather died, my grandmother's steps needed fixing. He lived in a row home. He didn't live in an exorbitant home. He lived in a row home in South Philadelphia. And he fixed my grandmother's steps for free, yet his contractors come and fix it. So I wanted to give Italians a good name despite
Yes.
all this other stuff that went on. And that's my only comment.
And thank you, Rick. I appreciate that.
Perspective. It's called perspective.
Does he have a question? Go ahead, sir.
In the late 70s, as we know, all kinds of organized crime figures were knocked off, as well as all kinds of intelligence officials.
Yes.
And I think if we had a great idea of who was more behind those hits, intelligence agencies themselves or organized crime, do you have a take on that?
I think both. All.
Do you have a take on who had the upper hand over each other?
Well, let's just say this, organized crime, like I said, shady shit, yeah, they got away with, well, did they get away with murder? Some did. But then again, so did some of our government got away with murder. Hell, look at JFK, they got away with murder. Right on the streets of Dallas, in the heart of the day. So, I would say who would have the upper hand? I would say government would have the upper hand. But again, I think they made the underworld, the mafia, do some of their bidding, and maybe they didn't want to get their hands dirty, so they turned to them. They did that on several occasions.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Now, I know I wrapped up early with the Hoffa presentation, and I'm pretty good on my time. So I want to talk about this for about the next 5 minutes. My good friend Larry Rivera, go ahead and stand up, Larry, and come on up here. Nothing like putting him on the spot, right? Okay, well, while he's getting up here, Larry is really great at a program called Blender. Now, on my show that I do online, you can always come to it. It's for free. We usually try to have one every month. It's called The Journey, on Trail to Truth and JFK assassination. But we also go on to other tasks as well. But he introduced me to Blender way back in Olney, Illinois, and first time I was there in 2019. Now, it's a steep learning curve, but I'm learning it. And I decided to fall down the rabbit hole. My name's not Alice, but I went down that damn rabbit hole of 3D printing, 3D modeling. I'm really glad that I did, because now I have something in my hand that I never thought I was going to be able to have, something that looked like it, and it turned out really damn well. Does anybody know what this is? It's the Harper fragment. Now, is it truly the Harper fragment? No, you can't go, hey, I got a piece of Kennedy's bone like you did last night in the bar. But that'll scare the shit out of a few people. Hey, I remember handing somebody a Carcano bullet and said, yeah, that went through the wrist of a human cadaver, and they dropped that so much like it was the plague. But it was funny to see their reaction, so I can only imagine what this would have been like last night. Ed was relaying the story to me. But we started out with something really thin, less than a millimeter. And then we went to something a little bit thicker. And then we finally got something that's really close to the thickness of a human skull. After researching, finding out the thickness, Larry has it down pat for the design and for the shape of it and the curvature. We're now in the process of going back to the drawing board and bringing out definition and details. We're going to bring in, David Mantic, Michael Chesser, bring those guys in that have the medical background that can help us out with this and take it to the next level. If anybody hasn't seen these, Larry's got one walking around with it in his pocket. Casey's got one. Brian Edwards has one. Chris Gallup has one. Hey, you know what? I just decided, the hell with it, let's print them all up. And if I would have, it's kind of like gum in the classroom. I would have brought one for everybody, but hey, I didn't have enough time to print them because they take about, this little piece of plastic takes about 4 hours to print. But Larry, go ahead and let me know, what do you think of it?
Yeah, I started this probably about 5 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago. And while I was learning Blender, I wrote in my book, how the technology can be used for things like this. This is unprecedented. Nobody's ever done this before. Okay, and the thickness, obviously, we have consulted with Dr. Mantic. He's working on that, okay? But we're able to continue to refine the model in Blender, and then what we use, actually, we use the actual photographs, which are two-dimensional, okay? And what we do is we use them as a reference image, and in Blender, we trace it, and then we start to give it a volume. Okay, in Blender you work with what's known as vertices, edges, okay, and complete faces, okay, of objects.
X, Y, and Z axes.
Yeah, and you were working in X, Y, and also the Z axis, which is the vertical. And the thing about this is that the Blender community worldwide is exploding, you know, in design, because you can design buildings, you can take a picture and duplicate it exactly in 3 dimensions if you know how to work with the reference image. And in this case, we used the photographs of the FBI that they took of the Harper fragment. The Harper fragment wasn't even supposed to be around. Okay, it was discovered the next day after the fact, more than 29 hours later, when they did a second combing of the infield of Dealey Plaza, and they found it further down from the limousine, from the location of the limousine, sort of like an indication that this was a piece of skull that after the impact from behind was thrown forward, okay? And that's where Billy Harper found it. And had Billy Harper not gone to his uncle, who was an MD, and they immediately took pictures and they looked at it, they say, hey, this is a fresh piece of skull from JFK's head, you know? And then, like always happens, this was given to Berkeley and it disappeared. Dr. Berkeley disappeared the Harper fragment. But before they took pictures, they were able to take pictures, and the FBI took pictures also, okay, CD 1269, and they took inner and outer. When we had that, we were able to model both sides separately, the inner and the outer, then combine them, and then give it curvature. At the same time, we didn't know the thickness, so it wasn't in the equation, but that's what we're working on now. And the other thing is, there are some details here, but if you look at the model in the computer, there's a lot more detail and things that we can still work on to perfect this. As far as the size, this is extremely accurate, and he will tell you about the curvature now, if that's accurate at all.
Yeah, as far as the curvature, I mean, I've got a bald head, so it's a little easier to, you know, see it on the back of my, I do have the orientator right?
No,
Okay, like that? Yeah. So, let me see it.
this from Mantic's book,
Yeah.
this is his orientation of the Harper fragment.
Right.
His book,
So,
Harper fragment.
when you get the opportunity to look at something that no longer exists, and I know that Larry caught a lot of shit from several researchers. I won't name anybody, but they basically said he's dealing in cartoons.
Not many.
You know, but there's a lot of people that said, you know what, he's onto something. I'm one of those people. Part of doing the stuff with Project JFK, I mean, I just turned 48 yesterday. I'm into technology. Larry's into technology. This is where we've got to take this case to, is technology. We got to go back, look at things with fresh eyes, teach it to the younger generation of students, because, you know, we're not going to be around forever. So if you can give them something other than a photograph and say, here's what I'm talking about, and they can visualize it, they can hold it in their hand, they can rub their finger across it and go, hey, I understand this now. I mean, this is a big step forward in the JFK assassination case. They took the bullet fragments, CE 399, they took it to NIST and digitized the scans. I am now going to try my best. I worked on this for basically 2 months, night and day. Several phone calls to Larry to go, hey man, I think I'm close, but I don't know if I've got it exactly right. And then he's going back to the drawing board to do things. Now we've got Mantic involved. So the idea that, you know, are we close to something? Yeah, we're really close to it. But I just, like I say, I wanted to show it to you guys, and anybody that wants to join the train of falling into going and getting a 3D printer and trying things for yourself, hey, I welcome that.
They go on sale on eBay next week.
Mercari, Etsy, but no. In all seriousness, folks, this wasn't done to make money. This was done to educate. That's what we're doing here this weekend. This is what we do at Project JFK on a pretty regular basis. But hey, we do all have lives, and shit sometimes goes sideways. And I can't get online and do a show. But it's educating the younger generation. And let's just face it, they don't carry history books like we used to in school. They carry electronics and deciding, what are they going to learn? Well, I guarantee you they're not going to learn about this in school. So it's up to us to explain this to them. And that's what we're all about. It's what we're doing here. Educate the younger generation. So I'm going to wrap up the Hoffa presentation. I think we're right on time, aren't we, Don? Okay. Let's take a quick 2-3 minute break, and then we're going to come right back with me being your teacher, you're being my students with RFK 101. I'm going to switch the cameras on.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, David Knight.